Hi, my name is Yosefa Huber. I'm a US CPA working with Americans living in Israel.
Hi, I'm Baruch Swinkin. I'm the partner at Route 38, the CFO of Route 38 Professional Services Ltd, a payroll services company here in Israel as well.
And we want to talk specifically today about what people need to do when they're working for US companies or taking on any sort of work where they're not an employee of an Israeli company. So someone who is living in Israel, doing work not as an employee of an Israeli company. What are your options? What do you need to do to set it up? So to start with, we're just going to go over a real quick overview of the types of businesses you could set up, and then we'll go into more depth into some of the steps for a new business or a small business. So just to get some lingo out there, one thing you might hear is atzma'i, which is a self-employed person, kind of a general term. Within that, you might have an Osek pator, which is generally speaking a small business, a business that is not required to collect VAT or ma'am from their customers. It could be because their revenue is under a certain threshold or they're in certain occupations. Another within Atzma'i is Osek Morshe. So an Osek Morshe is either you're over about 100,000 shekels of revenue, or you're in certain occupations which require it, or you have some other reason where it's beneficial to you to be an Osek Morshe. So those are both Atzma'im. You could also be obviously an employee of any company. And the other option that you would have if you're working for yourself is you could open a corporation, an LTD or Ba'am in Israel, where you would then employ yourself and anyone else you want to employ. So those we're going to talk about in a bit more detail. Osek Morshe, Ba'am, we're going to talk about that in a bit more detail. The other option that you have is that sort of within that, you could be employed by a company, which Baruch can tell you about.
Yes, the third option that you mentioned is to be employed by a payroll services company such as Route 38. That gives you the option of being able to really seamlessly transition, if you're making Aliyah, seamlessly transition your work from the States or for anywhere in the world for that matter to Israel. And if you're already living here, to make your life as simple and easy as possible without having to worry about opening up any tax files, without any other reporting obligations here in Israel. We take care of these types of services, take care of everything for you from soup to nuts, and makes your life much, much simpler on many levels.
Okay. So in general, we're going to refer to that today as a payroll service. But it can go by a number of firms, a number of names, which you've mentioned they can have some subtle differences. And if you are going that way, you do want to really compare what they have to offer. Some of them handle a whole lot more than others. So definitely all payroll services are not created equal. So to start with, let's talk about if you don't do anything else. The default would be that you are an Osek Pator when you're just starting out, assuming that you're not in any of these professions where you have to be an Osek Morshe. So today we're just going to start with Osek Pator. So you're just starting a business. Either you just found a couple clients, or you got offered, which is very common these days, you just got offered a job with a US company and they tell you they want you to be a contractor. So what do? So the first thing that you would do, Baruch, feel free to jump in here anytime. But the first thing I tell my clients usually is find an Israeli accountant to help you open all your files. And a lot of people do try to do it themselves. And I find that sometimes they miss something here or there, and they can often owe a lot more money in penalties than if they just hired an accountant in the first place. So I generally say just talk to an accountant, especially if you're a new Ole and you're not used to doing all the Israeli things, all the bureaucratic things. So
I would just say, I'm sorry to cut you off, but not only to hire an accountant and to speak with an accountant, but to really do as much due diligence as you possibly can, educate as much as possible. That's an overriding theme of everything we're going to talk about today. There are so many options out there. You're going to get a lot of information. It's really, really important to do your homework, to really try to find out as much as you can about whatever area you want to be in and what your options are, to seek as many different opinions as possible. and then to hone in and find the right solution for you. So if you're opening up, for example, an Osek pator, and you're going to be speaking to an accountant, try to understand, before you start with them, what the lingo is, what the terminology is, and what your rights and obligations are, and what your requirements are.
I have a lot of information on my website. I have some downloadable things on my website with definitions in Hebrew and English and some due dates and things like that. And it's also really important to find an accountant who understands what you're doing. So if you're going to be getting paid from the US, please find an accountant who understands international taxation. Or if you're a new ole, find someone who works with new olim and understands all the extra tax credits and various choices that you could be making on the way that things are done. It's really important to find somebody who really understands your type of business or the kinds of income that you're having. And we're going to talk in another video about different kinds of accountants and what you might want to be looking for. So you would generally start with opening a tik atzma'i with Mas Haknasa, with the Israeli tax authorities. You would also need to open a file with Bituach Leumi. You would need to open a file with Ma'am, or VAT. Even if you're not collecting VAT, there's an annual report you have to do to basically say, I'm still pator, I'm still exempt from collecting that. And over a very minimum threshold, you'll also be required to put into a pension for yourself. So if you don't decide to create any sort of a more complicated corporation structure, or you don't do something like using a payroll service where you're an employee, then these are all the different things that you're going, sort of all the different moving pieces that you could have at any given time. Now, if you do go that direction, hopefully you're using a professional accountant who's helping you juggle these things and keeping track of everything. And it's not, such a burden, but it is a lot, especially for a new ole to deal with. So keep in mind, there are a lot of things that you need to set up.
Sure, and if specifically with an Osek pator, if you're making, somewhere less than 6,000-7,000 shekels a month, you're making somewhere less than $2,000-$3,000 a month. It's definitely an option you should consider. It's really straightforward. Mm-hmm. As you said, you first you have the accountant help you open up these files, and really your only requirements over the course of the year then is an annual return, and that's really it. Obviously, you have to keep some level of organization of your invoices, your expenses, and things of that nature, and ensure that you know exactly how much you made over the course of the year and how much you're spending. But it's really, really simple and straightforward, and doesn't require too much of your time. So it's really a great option for someone who's really, as you said, starting out a business or making very little money now, and a stepping stone to things that are a little bit bigger. There is one drawback. Yes, I think you can speak to that.
There's a few, but on the U.S. tax side, there's definitely some drawbacks. But let's talk just for a second about what kinds of costs someone could be looking at. So I think that anybody living abroad, earning money abroad, or with accounts abroad, or living abroad and earning money from anywhere, any sort of foreign anything, really needs a U.S. accountant living in the country where they are. So if you're living in Israel and you're a US citizen, please hire a professional US CPA or EA in Israel, or someone who's dealing with Israelis every single day.
For sure. And it doesn't matter if you've been doing your own taxes for the last 20 years, and I can't advise enough for you to find someone here in Israel. There are plenty of people here who are licensed and are really great and know the laws back and forth.
Assuming that you're already using a US accountant, on top of that, we're really just talking about the difference in fees between just being a regular employee or having a business on top of that. So assuming you already have a professional accountant in Israel, it really depends on how complicated your business is, but anywhere between another 100 shekels and 1,000 shekels on top of your US tax return. So really depends on how much work they're doing for you. But I would say 300-400 shekels is pretty average. This is on top of whatever you're already paying for your other US reporting FBARs, things like that. And the bigger expense is on the Israeli side, because if you're an Israeli, if you're only an employee, then you wouldn't need an Israeli accountant in most cases if you don't have any income from abroad or you're within your first 10 years. So that's more where you're spending the money. And that's also more frustrating for somebody who's not making more than like 2,000 shekels a year, because Israel has no minimum for reporting. there's technically no amount under which you can make and legally not have to report. So technically, as soon as you're planning to make any money at all, before you write that first receipt, you're supposed to be opening up all these files.
Technically, yes. I mean, if you've already written your first receipts, you still can go ahead and open the file later in the year.
Right.
You just need to educate yourself again on what needs to be done.
Israel has very, very specific requirements. If you're doing it by hand, you have to have specific receipt books. If you're not doing it by hand, you have to use one of their approved programs. You can't be using QuickBooks or Excel. And can you give us any sort of general idea? Obviously, fees can vary a lot depending on different circumstances, but about what maybe should somebody budget if they're starting a business to pay an Israeli accountant?
If you're starting a business and you're opening up an Osek pator, you can expect somewhere around 600 shekel plus ma'am fee for actually opening up the various files. Obviously, that's plus or minus maybe 100 shekels or so, but that's in that range. That's pretty much the market rate. And then you'll have the annual return requirement, which will run you somewhere around 2,000 shekels. Again, give or take maybe a couple hundred shekels, 200-300 shekels, plus ma'am, plus VAT. In general, if you're opening up a business and you're starting, cash flow is a concern and you want to be tight and be as frugal as possible. On the other hand, I've seen all too many times people take the cheaper route, usually get what you pay for. And I would say in this regard, if you're going to spend a couple extra 100 shekels, then you're well in the long run.
Yeah. And there are accountants who will open teaks for much less, but usually they're annual fees. Usually they pick it up with the annual fees. So,
sure.
Compare overall and don't assume that you're just automatically saving, this chunk of money. If you open all your own files, you're going to have to go to all the different offices. You could make mistakes. In the long run, I never see it work out well. So please do hire an accountant if you need to open a teak. But let's say that you just got a job in the US and you know that you're going to be making, let's say, for example, $4,000 a year. So in many of those cases, and this is why I'm talking to Baruch right now, in many of those cases, I will tell my clients to go talk to Baruch. And there's a few reasons that I think that can be very beneficial. So one is just, especially as new olim or just generally busy people who don't love filing forms with different tax authorities. So Baruch's company and Payroll, not many, but some payroll services, they act as an employer. So you would be an employee of Route 38 if you were to go to Baruch and hire their company. You would be an employee of Route 38. And so number one, that can just ease up some of the headache because he is very experienced in this area. He's going to guide you in all the things you need to open. We'll talk more about that. But the other thing is that if you are a self-employed person, so if you are a contractor either for a US company or companies where you get a 1099, or you do anything else on the side, anything where you are not an employee with a contract, then you need to budget about 15% US taxes towards Social Security. And that's probably the number one reason that people switch from being an Osek pator to either a company like Route 38 or they incorporate. So that's the number one thing you're saving. You're saving about 15% on taxes.
In terms of taxes themselves, there's no difference really. And if you're taxed, if you're independent versus an employee, so the income tax itself, referred to as translated as mas haknasa, does make a difference.
Okay.
And bituach leumi itself, national insurance itself, is a slight difference, but not a major difference. The biggest difference you're going to find is going to be in the area of pensions and severance. And just to clarify, when you talk about that 15% savings, that's a big catch, and people they get excited about that very quickly, and they should be. But it's not completely a 15% savings. I want to make sure that people understand this because often
it's not currently 15% savings.
That's for sure. Much of those 15% savings you're going to have are going to be shifted to your pension obligation. Without getting into too technical level of detail, if you are working as a 1099 and a contractor and you are, as I'll discuss in a few minutes, covering both the employer and the employee side of costs, you have a much more significant requirement to pay more money into a pension fund, into a severance fund, which is also mandatory and similar to pensions. And in effect, you are going to be saving some of that 15%, a decent chunk of that, but you are also going to be shifting that 15% from effectively an American investment into Social Security to investment in pensions in the economy, in the industry in Israel. Which again, if you're making Aliyah or if you live here, I would argue is something that you idealistically want to do, and maybe a great, better return on investment in the future as well. So you may not save that 15% in your pocket today. You may save 5, 6, 7%, but you're also shifting your investments to, I think.
And you have a bit more control. You have a bit more control over what you're doing with your investments. It's not sitting with the government. So I think the first thing that I ask people before they make a decision like this, whether it's to change from being an Osek pator to incorporating or using a payroll service, is how many credits have you already put into US Social Security? And there's no one answer for everybody that says, okay, at this point you can stop putting in. Some people might get to 38, you need 40 credits to get anything. Some people might get to 38 and say, I'm not counting on it anyway. I don't want to put another dollar in. Or you might say, I'm young and I can, put more money in at any time in my career, but I need to save the money today. So it's a very individual decision. Some people have very few credits and they just like putting into US Social Security, makes them feel better. So it's very individual, but it's something that you need to consider, because if you do this, if you go this route, then you would not be putting into US Social Security. You would be choosing a different tracks for your pension. Another thing that I think can be a huge benefit, not a huge benefit, but some benefit to US citizens to use a payroll service, is that basically anything having to do with foreign when it comes to US taxes, almost everything is a gray area, because the US doesn't come out with very specific laws on Israeli pension funds, Israeli this, Israeli that. So we have to look at the existing laws and requirements and then figure things out for ourselves. But generally speaking, the Israeli government, if you're an atzma'i, the Israeli government requires that you put into a pension. But having a pension as an atzma'i can open up some complications. And I don't want to get into it because it's a very gray area and it's something that different accountants look at very differently. But I can say that having a pension from an employer is less gray. So I can't say, one is 100% good or bad or anything, but I can say that I would consider it to be a bit less of a risk that you're doing something wrong if the pension is coming from an employer. So if you go to Baruch and you say, hey, I'm making 10,000 shekels a month from this company in the US, and I don't want to deal with all this stuff, I want you to handle it for me, you would then be an employee of Route 38 and you would be getting a pension from Route 38 as your employer, and maybe a Keren Hishtalmut and Pitzuim, which is your severance fund, and all these benefits that you would get from an employer. What other benefits does somebody get from an employer that they would have if they were an employee of Route 38?
Well, as we mentioned before, one of the primary benefits is just in terms of ease of taking care of all your admin and accounting and tax requirements for you, especially if you're making Aliyah and you have enough on your plate already. This will make the transition really simple and straightforward. If you are working as an employee for a company in the States, we'll engage with them and try to take care of all the back office, the agreements and contracts that we have to sign with them before your Aliyah. If possible, and that'll allow you to really start working on day one and have nothing to worry about when you land here. At least in that regard, you'll have plenty of other things on your plate at that point. And our goal is to really try to make this particular situation, this particular issue, something that's really simple for you. You'll be paid as per Israeli standard on or before the 9th of every month, direct deposit. You don't have to worry about cashing a check or how you're going to be receiving the money. It's a great way to get shekels into your account over here. Although we also have the option of paying US dollars in the States. As we mentioned, we'll help take care of you. We don't actually manage or create your pension funds for you, but we'll put you in touch with our preferred pension agent, who's also an insurance agent. You have the ability of the rights to use whoever you want. But if you're new here and don't know the lay of the land, we'll introduce you to someone who'll get you a free estimate up front. really take
and
care
that's
of
pretty
you.
standard at other employers also, that they might have a couple people that they suggest. You have the right to use whoever you want, but you would be at just about any employer, you're going to be, basically setting it up yourself.
Exactly. And but once it's set up, we'll give you the guidance in order to do that. Once it's set up, make sure the deposits are made into the proper accounts every single month. We're around for payroll tax consulting if you have issues, if you're up against certain tax brackets and need ways to try to figure out how to, to manage your income as best as possible, so to make sure that you're paying what you're supposed to be paying, but not more than you're supposed to be paying. We're there to help you. Most Israeli employees, maybe even who've grown up and live here, you get a tlush maskoret every single month, a pay stub every single month, which is a statement of your earnings for the month. I'd get to say that many Israelis don't have a clue what's on there. And in the first month, when you get a new pay stub from us, a tlush maskoret from us, we'll be there for you to help explain to you exactly where every shekel is going. We have full transparency.
Wonderful. I also have a video on my blog and on YouTube where it goes over that. But that's great. That's wonderful.
And,
my first employer
also we have American style customer service. We're really there. You're coming from America, you're coming from an American or an Anglo background, you expect a certain level of hand-holding and people to help you and be there for you, which may or may not yet exist in this country. And we're really there to try to ease that transition and make life as simple for you as possible.
One reason I'm very confident sending people to you is that besides the fact that all the clients that I've had that have gone to you have been very happy. And this was before you and I even spoke. I had clients who found your services on their own and said good things. But I also trust that, number one, you've been very generous with your knowledge, even to people who are not necessarily candidates for your services. And you're generally very willing to tell somebody when it's not in their best interest to use their services. So I'm always happy to say, give him a try, and he'll tell you if it's not good for you.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. I mean, listen, our job here, we have businesses. We're trying to help support families, but at the end of the day, our job here is, to try to help as many people as possible. We've both been put in positions where we have knowledge bases that allows us to do so. And it's a pleasure and really a privilege to be able to help people. And to the extent that we can help, brothers and sisters come home, that's what, enough job satisfaction for me.
So so we're talking basically today about Osek pator, where you're kind of running your own show a lot more with an Israeli accountant who's doing at least your annual your annual reporting versus a payroll service. So let's talk a little bit about some things that would make someone not a great candidate for your services. So first of all, obviously your services have a monthly fee. So someone who's making less than a certain amount of money is not going to be an ideal, not going to be worthwhile for them. I think you've told me that's, you want to jump in?
Sure. Listen, I tell people in general, if you're making less than 7,500 shekels and you're really going to be qualified as an Osek pator at that level, I'm happy to help. We're not going to save you any money. We'll definitely make your life easier and provide a service, but we're not going to save you money. And I think it's in your best interest to open up an Osek pator, to open up the independent tax file. We actually can help you with that as well. And as your business grows, we'll be able to, if we are doing that for you, we'll be able to manage it for you, or not manage it. We'll be able to watch it for you, consult you from time to time. And when you're ready to take the leap, then maybe you can jump on to a regular service. If you're making between 7,500 and 10,000 shekels, we may or may not save you money, depends on your situation. Again, that's really up to you if you want to pay for the service. Above 10,000 shekels, I believe we're providing a service, saving a little money, and I think it's a win-win. In general, when we mentioned the term Osek Moshe in the beginning, that is the level, as we said, above 100,000 shekels. Just very quickly, reporting requirements will change at that level. You have more significant reporting requirements. You'll need some high level of bookkeeping, probably some bi-monthly reporting. Obviously, you're going to need the accountant for that, and therefore your accounting fees are going to increase. That's for people who are working for companies in Chutz La'aretz and outside of Israel. That's really the main difference. If you're working for a company in Israel, there's a VAT issue as well. So that's kind of when it's a question whether you should make that leap to a payroll service or not. people who are in that category, are making above 10,000 shekels a month, but are maybe not, a great fit for a payroll service, are really individuals who have high level of overhead. If you're really running your own business, you're a plumber,
expenses. We're talking about expenses first.
Exactly. You're a sofer, a scribe, things
you're
of that
selling
nature.
Goods, retail.
Exactly. If you're buying and selling, if you have cost of goods, if you have investment and monthly expenses, we're really not able to run someone's business in that regard. We're really meant for someone who's very low overhead, very low expenses. They're working in a home office or a shared office space. They have their computer and maybe a few things here and there. That's the ideal candidate for this type of a service. If you're really building your own business, it may be more costly and in terms of you're a plumber, you're an electrician, it may be more costly to do it on your own, and sometimes a little scary, but you really have to manage your business and
when you're laying out the costs. When you're comparing the costs and the services of a payroll service versus putting 15% Social Security, ideally, you're going to get back at least what you put into Social Security eventually. I usually say it's a nice consolation prize for people who are self-employed. It's not my personal ideal investment strategy. Just it depends on your age and how many credits you've put in, and I can't tell the future. It's very personal, but yes, in theory, the 15% that you put in Social Security is in some way an investment in your future, where putting whatever fees you're paying to a payroll service and accountant, it's they're fees that you may need to be paying for a service, just like any service, but it's not going into any sort of fund that you ever will expect to get back. So keep those in mind when you're laying.
It's an investment in the present, not an investment in the future. And in order to create the future, you need to make sure that your present is stable.
You do.
And on the other side, like you said, you may be putting money into Social Security and may get back what you put in. Hopefully, if you're putting money into a pension fund, you're going to get back much more money than you put in as well.
You'd also be putting in a very small amount into Medicare, which you would not get back unless you move back to the States. So that's not, but it's relatively minor.
I appreciate you having me on today. I think we gave a high level overview of the things that we can help you with.
So much for joining us.
The most important thing is you can make a living here in Israel. Please consider it. Come on home.
Amen.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.